Hi everyone, we are live again. I'm so excited. We continue to chat on histamine and we're going to have Chloe Hall, dietitian, join us to talk about diet, everything about nutrition and diet. So I'm so excited. Yesterday we had a fabulous chat with Dr. Costa on histamine intolerance. It was a brilliant start to the week to have him there. So let's continue to chat and chat about food and nutrition. So I can see that Chloe is online, so I'll just wait for her to join. Now, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Let's make it as interactive as possible. And you know what? It's Valentine's Day today. Let me just make sure. Wave. Oh, no. Okay, view request, yes. Go live with, so I think she should be joining us now. So thank you everyone for joining. Hi Chloe.
Hiya, you all right?
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. And yourself?
I love you have the Valentine's theme. You know, I only just registered that it's Valentine's Day. So yeah, thank you for being here. Oh gosh, yes. And thank you to everyone being online with us on Valentine's Day to talk about diet and histamine intolerance.
We've been together 10 years. Our love is way past that.
Yes. So Chloe and I, we actually studied together back at University of Surrey and we've reconnected, which is just lovely. And Chloe has an interest in histamine intolerance. She has very sort of personal experience with it as well, which I'm sure you can tell us all about. And you work a lot with both, I think, children and adults with histamine intolerance. So Chloe, tell us about yourself before we step into the world of histamine.
Yeah, so I've been a dietitian for the same time as you, so over 10 years, and my personal interest in histamine intolerance really comes through my husband. So he was diagnosed with histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome about 6 years ago. And it was really through that I started seeing all these patients that had histamine intolerance, and I think it is so underdiagnosed and so much more out there than we ever thought. And actually it's so important that we do identify it and that people do get support. So really my interest has come through that.
Amazing. And obviously having that personal experience must really help you to put yourself into the world of your patients, I would think.
Yeah, I think it's been hugely helpful because it's really helped me to appreciate what a complex condition it is and how it isn't just food that affects histamine intolerance, it's so many other different factors. And I think living with that day to day has really helped me appreciate that, and also appreciate some of the really complex things that you have to do with food and some of the things that can affect like your social life that I'm sure we'll come on to chat about.
Yes, because I was thinking, yesterday we did a great talk with Dr. Costa on histamine intolerance. So, I think maybe today we should perhaps focus on your top 3 tips on, histamine intolerance and diet, I think. What are the 3 top tips? Because if someone has a diagnosis or if they want to try the elimination diet to see if that's helping them with their symptoms, where do they start? Because there's so much information out there, so much.
There's so much information, isn't there? And there's so many different lists. So we don't have a gold standard of what's high histamine, what's low histamine. So it's hard to know what list to follow. And even as a dietitian, it's hard to know what list to follow. Yes. As I'm sure you found, because you followed the low histamine diet, didn't you?
Yes, I did it for 3 and a bit days and it was very difficult, but I got some books from, Australia that you recommended and they were helpful, but I still found it, I found it really difficult because I love tomatoes. I said that as well yesterday. I thought, oh gosh, this is so hard. So the video will come out, so that will be on YouTube. And you have also written a blog, which will be on Nishti's website. So thank you for that, Chloe.
no problem. So yeah, that is one of the problems, is that there's no established gold standard list. So finding foods you can and can't eat can be really tough, and you can end up on a much more restrictive diet than you actually need to be, because you could follow 5 different lists. So really one of my tips is find a list that you think is reputable and stick to that one list. Do not search around, do not use 10 different lists. So the lists that I generally see people use are the Swiss intolerance group list, the SIGI list. That is fairly reputable. A lot of research has gone into behind it, but the thing I struggled with it is that it's not split into foods that are low, moderate, high, very high. So it's hard to know how to reintroduce, whereas the Australian diet you mentioned, which is the RPAH diet, is much more comprehensive. So it lists spices, herbs, low, moderate, very high, high. So I think it's a bit easier to separate foods out and also reintroduce when it gets to that stage. Yes. So yeah, I would say pick a list and stick with it. Don't skip around. Another tip I would say is plan, like hugely plan, especially when you're first starting. So, if you're eating on the run, it can be really tough just to pick something up. So try and, account for that and pack lunches and plan meals. There's loads of great recipes out there online. So there's a few blogs, like Through the Fibro Flog has some amazing recipes. So find some of them and still enjoy your food, because otherwise it can be really, really dull.
Yes. The low histamine kitchen, I think, I follow her, and I got very inspired from her recipes.
Yeah, they're great.
So I tend to also recommend that to clients, because I don't have well, now I have a few recipes which will be posted this week, low histamine, but it's not something that I personally sort of think about. So it's nice to have those resources, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And something that completely changed our lives was finding a no tomato sauce. So an alternative to tomatoes, because like you, we were used to using them in everything. So another thing is, if you do use a lot of tomatoes, is finding one of those recipes that works for you. So we often use like roasted pointed peppers and do a sauce out of that, or we've done butternut squash ones. So there's loads of different things you can do. It's just trying some of them out and finding something that you're happy with.
Yes, because tomatoes, for those of you who are online, obviously is, maybe we should talk about some of the maybe the 5 most triggering foods, perhaps, from your experience. I mean, from my experience, tomatoes and citrus fruits. I don't know about yourself.
I think it's really hard to say which foods are most triggering, just because sensitivities vary so widely, and also it depends on how full your bucket is. So some of you may have heard of the bucket theory. So if your bucket is empty and it has very little histamine in, then you may be able to get away with a really high histamine meal like bacon, eggs, tomatoey baked beans. But actually, if your histamine bucket's already been filled up by things you're sensitive to, like stress or pollen in the air or hormones, then you might be much more sensitive. So even if someone is sensitive to a specific food, that may completely change throughout the year. So I think it's really difficult to say 5 most triggering foods, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. There's just so multiple factors involved, which makes it so hard to work with clients as well. What do you think, Chloe?
Yeah, no, it really can. And one of the things that I think is most useful is keeping a food and symptom diary, but also maybe tracking like where you've been, what you've been exposed to, what season it is. So it can be really, take a lot of work, take a lot of detail, especially for those with mast cell activation syndrome, who may not necessarily be stable a lot of the time. I think those outer factors play such a massive role, and it's not just the foods you eat. So I think that's something that's really important to stress, is you could have the most restrictive low histamine diet in the world and you can still have symptoms. So it's important to work with someone that can recognize that and help support you to actually get the nutrients you need.
Yes,
But
yes.
yeah, there are some foods that do seem to trigger people more. So like cured meats, I find a lot. And like you say, tomatoes, but I think that's just because it's in everything and it kind of just tops up people's buckets a lot.
Yes,
And like
yes.
hidden histamines as well, so like vinegars and foods and yeast extracts and stuff. And it doesn't need to be massive quantities, but just adds to the overall daily bucket.
And how do you approach it? Like, because the low histamine diet is extremely limited. How do you approach it with your clients? Do you look at what's, what perhaps they're having a lot of that's high in histamine and then take it from there, or do you go all in?
It really depends. So a lot of people come to me having already started the low histamine diet, and actually a lot of my role is trying to get foods back in, or try and even if it's not getting high histamine foods back in, often people have restricted so much it's getting other foods that probably are low histamine back in that they've cut out. For some people, I think the low histamine diet may actually add additional stress, which is going to increase your histamine anyway. So I would maybe just take one or two foods out that are abundant in their diet. But then for others, we do the full diet and work through with gradual reintroduction. So I take it through if anyone's done like the low FODMAP diet. So gradually working through one food at a time to find what people are sensitive to. So for my husband, it is, like a bucket. He does fill up and does overflow with symptoms, but there are specific foods that make him really, really poorly. So sourdough bread and sourdough products. So we often found we were eating at restaurants and then we were ending up calling an ambulance, and he's a paramedic, so he doesn't like that very much. He was really, really unwell with it. And it was only when we started looking back at menus and started tallying up what had he eaten that made him so unwell. Whereas I have other clients with histamine intolerance and MCAS that can eat sourdough absolutely fine and actually say they're better on that. So
Right.
I would say really track things back and track where you've been, what's happened, and try and make patterns out of things. And that's really how we've worked it out and how I work it out with clients.
So it's basically like being a bit of a detective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is the thing. It's the thing when it comes to nutrition and your health, is going back and looking to see if there is a trend. What do you think, Chloe, in terms of nutritional deficiencies in people following a low histamine diet, or macro or micronutrient deficiencies? What would you say are the sort of top ones?
I think the top one is weight loss. It's really unclear though if the weight loss has come because some people's symptoms are so bad. The nausea that might come with it, the gastro symptoms, the dizziness, the tiredness, none of those are particularly conducive to not losing weight. And actually the fatigue that people often feel, they don't feel like making a meal or can't make a meal. So it's hard to know if the diet was responsible for the weight loss or the symptoms.
Or the stress, maybe?
Stress as well, yeah.
I could imagine, yeah.
It's really stressful. And I think once you get the symptoms, it's hard to not be in that cycle of stress. The symptoms make you stressed and make you anxious and make you depressed.
Yes.
So I think that it's probably two parts to it, and then you add a low histamine diet on top, and that can cause weight loss because of the restrictive nature of it. Especially for people that may have relied on processed foods or ready meals and things like that, because there just aren't the equivalent in there's no low histamine ready meal. There's leftovers can be higher in histamine, so all of those things that someone may have relied upon are no longer available. Weight loss is probably the main thing. I have seen things like iron deficiency anemia if people are particularly sensitive to meat, for example. So there should be meat that you can eat on a low histamine diet. The fresher it is, the better. However, some people have said they think they're particularly sensitive to meat. So it's finding alternative sources. And I don't think there needs to be any nutritional deficiencies on it. But I think you need appropriate support because it can be really hard to find the right foods to keep your body nourished. So I think if it's well planned, then
Yes,
it can be done well.
the planning, I think, is everything, really.
Yeah.
It's everything. And because, you know, with fiber-rich foods, I feel, or I see that people struggle with that because they worry about fruit and vegetables. And we often end up talking about, you know, 30 plants a week, you know, trying to get that in. Once they're fine, then I try and challenge them on getting more plants in their diet to help establish a healthier gut. Because don't you feel that they're sort of, the fiber intake may be a little bit on the low side?
Yeah, it can be in some patients, especially because you're cutting out things like nuts, and some lists also cut out legumes. The RPAH list doesn't, which is one of the reasons I'm quite keen on it. Obviously, if you have a huge sensitivity to that, then it needs to be avoided. But while you're working out what you're sensitive to, if you can get it in, then great. And also there's a huge, it's an emerging sort of bit of evidence that's coming out, but it is thought that histamine intolerance is linked to your gut health. So certain types of bacteria in your gut produce histamine, but certain types can also help break it down. And those with histamine intolerance are also found to have lower levels of like good bacteria in your gut. So by restricting the fiber, you're almost damaging your gut health even more. So I do think the same as you, that it's so important to still include plant-based sources that you can tolerate. Yes.
And do you recommend, I mean, yesterday we did chat a little bit on, you know, vitamin C supplementation, but we didn't talk about, I don't think we managed to talk about the gut, because, you know, there's so much to talk about, isn't there? But do you recommend any probiotics for people, or how do you do it?
Yeah, so I do recommend probiotics for some patients, particularly those with gut symptoms, but a lot of my patients want to try them anyway, and want to know what types they could take without it causing any unnecessary symptoms, because actually some probiotics may make symptoms worse just because of the types of bacteria they contain. So they may contain that bacteria that produces the histamine. This
is very important, I think, what you're saying now, because yes, let's highlight. I wish I could highlight that.
There are specific brands that I would recommend over others. I've done a couple of blogs online. I think I might have even mentioned it in your blog, so I think that information will be available. Yeah.
Your blog will be available on Sunday, because I don't want to bombard you all with too much histamine, so it's coming bit by bit during the whole week. So on Sunday, your blog will be available, and it's very comprehensive for anyone that's rewatching this, because it is Valentine's night and people are probably out having dinner and we're chatting about histamine. So we have a few people online. Feel free to comment, send us some love. If you have any questions for Chloe, please do comment. We would appreciate it. It's always nice to get questions, I think. I don't know what you think, Chloe.
Yeah, 100%. Makes it a little less...
I know, yes. I just wanted to ask about the DAO supplements, whether it's something that you advise, and if you've seen, because we had a chat about it yesterday, and there isn't enough evidence to support its use. But I just wondered what your experience is with that.
So the evidence that there is really positive, or positive for certain symptoms like urticaria and migraine. And, although the studies are small, I have found in practice it can be really helpful. Okay. So for my husband particularly, it has been really helpful. It's not a cure, it's not going to make your symptoms go away, but what it may do for some people is reduce the bucket and actually reduce the amount of histamine that's coming in through the food you ingest. I think the trouble with the DAO is there's no established dose as to what's going to be most effective, and it has been queried whether the dosage needs to be higher. But the dosage in all of the tablets across Europe is exactly the same. So it doesn't matter what brand you take, they're all much the same. There are a few different brands that have been used in the studies, but really there's not one particular that I would recommend. But
Yeah.
A lot of my clients, because it's so expensive, use it maybe rather than every day, how it's recommended, might use it if they go out for dinner or want a higher histamine meal at Christmas, for example. So use it as a bit of a backup to have a little bit more of a more normal life. So I would say it can be useful in that sense.
Does your, sorry to be, I'm going to ask a personal question now, but your husband, does he take antihistamines as well to manage his symptoms?
Yeah, so he takes H1 antihistamines, H2 antihistamines, DAO and a probiotic. So yeah, he takes a lot.
He takes it all. Right, yes. Yeah. And do you feel that if he doesn't take the antihistamines, that no matter how little histamine foods he does eat, he still has a reaction? Or?
Yeah, so his symptoms are pretty extreme. So he's been on antihistamine for 10, 15 years. So even before we knew he had histamine intolerance and MCAS, he would get chronic urticaria if he didn't take it. So yeah, I would say that if he stopped anything he's currently taking, his symptoms would be really unstable. And so he got COVID and his symptoms are very unstable. So we had to add more medication in, more supplements in to get him back to the place he is now. So I think that's something I see as well, is like getting to a balance can be really difficult for some people, and actually finding that happy place where it is a chronic condition for most people. So I say for most people because some people are presenting with histamine intolerance like around the menopause, and although there's not lots in the literature about it, it has been documented that hormones can affect the sensitivity to histamine. So I think for some of these women, they may experience a decrease in symptoms postmenopausally, potentially, but every woman's different. Every woman's response to hormones is different, isn't it? So
yes. I think do you have some posts coming out on women's health?
Yeah, so I'll post in the next couple of days about women's health. So yeah, I will do.
That's brilliant. We need that. That's lovely.
I think it's a really interesting area. I think it's a really under-researched area.
Okay.
But it's definitely something me and other dietitians that work in this area are discussing. And
lovely. So in terms of practical tips for eating out, you know, I mean, you mentioned taking a DAO supplement. Well, that's what your husband tends to do, or some of your clients. Yeah. What else can people do to, you know, help themselves and help their symptoms?
I would say keep your bucket as empty as possible before you're going out for dinner. So if you know you're going to be going out for dinner and it's going to be really, really tricky to keep to maybe a stricter diet or avoid all of your triggers, then keeping it lower throughout the day or even for the week before to try and prepare for that meal, as it were. And also, you know, research the menu before you go out. So make sure you know, are there foods that you feel safer with? Because actually that anxiety around food is going to increase your histamine anyway. So anything you can do to make you feel more comfortable. So whether that's speaking to people, I think the trouble with histamine intolerance is there is no set menu. I have to follow a gluten-free diet. I can go to a restaurant and ask for a gluten-free menu, and that's fine. Whereas a lot of people don't really understand what histamine intolerance is, and there is no set list. Each person's list is very different, so it can be really hard to express that to restaurants. So, you know, if you do your own research, that might make you feel more comfortable. And, you know, certain people may find that certain types of food are their triggers. So we probably wouldn't go to an Italian restaurant that serves sourdough pizzas with a load of processed meats and tomatoes on. But, you know, another person might not go to, you know, a Chinese or whatever. But it's knowing what you are able to eat and what your personal triggers are, so, you know.
Yes, it's that awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
But keeping that bucket, you know, empty or not full is hard.
Yeah,
it's hard really. Because even the thought of it, I feel like with some people, even the thought of that stresses them out.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of, you know, mindfulness And you know, there's no research to show whether mindfulness helps to keep the bucket empty or low. But I wonder if there should be some evidence around that, because
I think
it's
any
just
of those relaxation strategies. So all of the things that I would recommend for like irritable bowel syndrome to try and keep that gut-brain connection,
yes.
you know, more relaxed, I would recommend for histamine intolerance as well. So like you say, mindfulness, yoga. You know, the trouble with me saying yoga is some of my clients are exhausted and dizzy, and that might not be suitable for them. But if you can do that sort of thing, then great. Or even, you know, things you enjoy like gardening or cooking things you love, or you know, watching a bit of Netflix, anything that is going to fill you out a bit.
Exactly.
I think I keep saying the trouble with histamine intolerance. There are many troubles with histamine intolerance, but you know, you can have an enjoyable life. I think is that it can become your whole life. It doesn't just affect you, it affects your whole family as well. So right at the beginning, I became very anxious when we were going out for meals and stuff, because I didn't know what was going to happen. So I think, and if everyone's talking about it, it really does consume your thoughts. So actually, the more you can do in terms of distraction and actually planning to you know, eat out and have social occasions, then I think it can help. And we found stuff like, you know, if we want a social occasion, actually having it at our house and planning a buffet that we know that, you know, my husband can eat all of the foods at, and you know, being more in control of it. So some people find that self-catering holidays are a little bit easier than going to, you know, an all-inclusive resort where you have no control over the food. So there are adaptations you can make to make life easier.
Yeah, because we ate out once when I was on the low histamine trial, and I couldn't eat low histamine out. We went to this Middle Eastern restaurant, and you know, everything has tomato in, and there were friends there, and I just thought, this is not going to work. There's not even a point. And it really got me thinking how hard it must be to eat out. You know, I know it's not just food, obviously, we know it's not just food that triggers you, but there's just so much to consider. And you learn that, because obviously you're in it because your husband is struggling with it. Whereas for me, I see clients, but it's not, I'm not dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, if that makes sense. But when you try the diet yourself, I really learned a lot of how difficult it is. So but you know, there are ways around it, and my husband now has a really balanced diet, and we do eat out and we do go on holiday, so you know, you can get there. You just need support, you need someone that has experience with, you know, how to do the diet. And there are so many cheats, as it were, in terms of you can't cheat the condition, but you can, you know, have enjoyment in your life, and you can enjoy your food. Yes, that's lovely. So I think I had another. Yes, I have a question, and this excites me. I don't know if it excites anyone else. I think we have a few dietitians online, which is always lovely. So let's go through a meal plan, Chloe. Like, what do you eat, you know? So you get up. So I was so pleased that I could have eggs, because I have to have eggs in the morning. So that was great. And you know, porridge. But should we go through some examples for breakfast, lunch and dinner, just to help people out a bit? What do you think?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. So, you know, porridge in the morning, you know, lunch might be a chicken wrap, or some sort of quinoa salad, or there's lots and lots of different things you can do. What do we have for dinner this evening? We had air fried chicken, so potato wedges and a salad.
And what dressing?
Dressings are much more tricky. So yes. I don't actually think my husband had a dressing tonight. It was a bit of a dash and run dinner. But we have done dressings in the summer that are sort of honey and oil and some fresh basil out the garden. So something simple like that. So we would avoid vinegars if we were doing a dressing for him.
So I really enjoy sesame oil on my salad. Because well, usually I'll put olive oil, but I couldn't put olive oil, so I use sesame oil.
Yeah, we often use rapeseed, but sesame oil sounds nice. But on some of the lists, it does say seeds. But if you can get away with sesame oil, then great.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. See, it's so hard because all the lists are different, and you just never know. But this is why working with a professional is key, really.
And I think, I can say that we had chicken for dinner, but actually some patients may find that that's really difficult for them and they don't tolerate chicken. So, I can give meal ideas, and I do often when I see patients, I have a whole list of meal ideas that we've tried. But really it's up to the person to pick which ones they feel they can do, because, what one person can tolerate, another person may not. So it's really hard to do meal plans for histamine.
Yes. But the main thing is as long as it's as fresh as possible. Right. So I think that's like the main takeaway, isn't it?
As fresh as possible. So some people decide to go to a butcher's or go to a fishmonger's and talk to them about how fresh it is. That isn't accessible for everyone. So all I would say is, budget supermarkets are fine. We use budget supermarkets all the time. Pick a date that's the longest, and also something that I sometimes suggest is freezing the meat if you're not going to use it until 5 days later, and then defrost it before use, because actually freezing slows the production of histamine. And same with leftovers. If you want to eat leftovers, then rather than keeping them in the fridge where they're going to produce more histamine, actually freeze them and then defrost them when you need to use them.
Brilliant. So that it comes back to planning again. So one could actually batch cook and freeze, and you're fine.
Yeah.
So there is a question here from the Health Wellbeing Nutri, and she says, not sure you've covered this. Which foods are excluded, and how does one keep a balanced diet? Okay.
So I think we briefly covered that earlier, didn't we? But I'm happy to recap. So foods are excluded. General consensus is fermented foods, processed meats, certain fruit and vegetables, aged meat, stuff like aged steaks are excluded. However, all of the other foods are open to debate, huge variety of different lists. So how do you keep a balanced diet? Work with a dietitian. Doesn't have to be me. Work with anyone who has experience in this condition. So important. But there are foods from every single food group that you can eat on the low histamine diet. So I think that's one thing we've stressed, isn't it? Plan. So that's probably the main thing I would stress on keeping you have healthy, balanced diet on the low histamine diet. Planning is key.
Yes, and can I just add to that? So, getting more fiber and more vegetables and fruit into the diet. For me personally, that's what I always try and do with someone on a low histamine or not even a low histamine diet. It could be anyone. And I find that breakfast, if we can get breakfast right and try and make that as balanced as possible, I'm not sure what your name is, the Health Wellbeing Nutri, then we are setting ourselves up for a good day. So what do I mean? So for example, I had a client and she was having crumpets for breakfast. So here in the UK, crumpets is something that is delicious with butter. But it wasn't it's not wholesome. And so what we started to do is to include some oats, and then she would make her own muesli. So she was okay with seeds, not nuts, but she was okay with seeds. So we made like a seedy porridge for breakfast, and then she was also okay with kiwi fruit. So she had some kiwi fruit, and that, do you see, we try to make it low histamine, making sure that we were taking into account what food she was tolerating, and then trying to get as much fiber and healthy fats in with the breakfast. And that's actually how it started, because I find sometimes it can be overwhelming, can't it, Chloe? And I tend to just start with the first meal of the day. And usually breakfast, I don't think is as balanced as it could be for a lot of people. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, and I'd often go back to the foods someone would have eaten before they presented with this issue and with the histamine intolerance. Some people may have always had it, but I would go back to what they would have eaten and maybe look at adaptations we can make to actually go back to eating the foods they want to eat. So for some people, it's things like sausages. Turkey sausages are often better tolerated than pork sausages. So we might look at that. We might look at ways of making spaghetti bolognese without a load of tomatoes in. Adapting things they would have eaten before and making life more normal. So I've introduced some, chicken pies to people, and they've been so pleased that they could just have a normal family meal that they would have eaten before they developed histamine intolerance. So I think going back to family favourites and also finding meals people can eat with their family. So a lot of the time they can feel really isolated, and actually they're having to cook separate meals and they're having to eat separately. So I think getting something that everyone can enjoy is so important.
Definitely, yeah. Making it easy for the whole family. It's just easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So she says, thank you. Thank you for the question. We love questions. I'm just mindful of time, Chloe. I mean, we could keep going, to be honest. I love chatting with you, and I love to chat about this topic. And I think it's just wonderful that you were able to join on Valentine's Day.
Thank you so much for having me. It's not like we could be eating chocolate anyway, so.
Oh. Yeah, I completely forgot about it, but that's just, yeah. Histamine intolerance is more important. Anyway, so I think we should maybe round up unless anyone has any other questions. And if you do, please reach out to either myself or Chloe. And if anyone wants another live chat, let us know what topics you want, because I think these chats are wonderful. You get input from, here you get input from 2 dietitians, and I just think, what's that's better than just one. So feel free, if you have any burning topics you want us to do lives on, please let us know. But thank you so much, Chloe. Oh, there's another question. Woohoo! How about milk and dairy? Is it okay? I am sorry, I don't know very much about a low histamine diet, so I'm learning. Oh, brilliant! Okay, Chloe, go ahead, because when it comes to dairy, you guys probably know what I'm going to say.
So yeah, on the low histamine diet, milk and some dairy is generally okay. So things like mature cheeses, blue cheese, anything that's aged, that is going to be high in histamine. Some people find they are sensitive to yogurt because of the fermented nature of it. Kefir, I wouldn't necessarily recommend for someone with a histamine intolerance, but normal milk for most people is fine. And if you don't want to have milk in your diet, then actually there are alternatives, plant-based alternatives that are fine on a low histamine diet. So oat milk is a common one that some of my clients use that's absolutely fine. Do you have other milks that people use on a low histamine diet, Nishti? Because I know you work with milk-free a lot more.
Yeah, more the oat milk, not the soya. The soya milk, it doesn't work. So if you're having symptoms, I'm curious now. I'm not sure what your name is, the Health Wellbeing Nutri, but throughout this video we've discussed that it's so hard to say which foods are the trigger and which ones are not, because it really depends on the person, but also it depends on whether your histamine bucket is low or it's medium, or if it's very high, because there are so many other factors that affect symptoms. So stress, for example, exercise, it's just so many things. So avoid anything aged. That's it. Simple.
Yeah. Don't need lists. That's basically the main.
That's it. That's all you need to know. Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated than that, but that is such a good tip, as in that is the main thing, avoiding aged foods, and fermented stuff can be really quite, you know, symptom triggering for people, can't they?
Yeah. And also, I think, sorry, just one last thing, patience. I find that, you know, I was working with an older gentleman, and he wanted answers right away, but, you know, I kept saying, we need to be patient, we need to be patient, because one has to be very patient, because when you're trying to find what is a potential trigger, food, if it triggers you once, I'm always like, okay, let's see what else let's see what happens again. We can't just put a line under that and say, okay, never have that again. We need to continue. We need to be patient. I don't know what you think, Chloe. I just think patience is underrated.
And I think retesting at different times is really, really important. Yeah. So my husband's going to love me talking about him all the time, but at Christmas, for example, when there's not loads of pollen in the air, he can get away with a lot more foods than tree pollen season, when he feels sick quite a lot of the time. So it is important to keep retrialing foods. Just because you've reacted badly to it once doesn't mean that you necessarily will the next time. So like you say, patience and retracking stuff and retrialing it. But it can be really scary for people to retrial, depending on what symptoms they've had in the first place. Then, you know, I probably wouldn't be encouraging my husband to retrial sourdough anytime soon. But, you know, other foods that have had less extreme reactions on people.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good point, Chloe. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. And we'll sign off now. Thank you so much, Chloe, for your time and your expertise. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.